Hi guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to The Wandering Reader. Today I'm going to be doing my April wrap up. I had a bumper reading month in April. I read a total of 14 books and 4,477 pages, which is insane. I think because I had 2 weeks off at the beginning of April, and it just meant that I could read a lot. We went away to Oxford for a few days in the second week, and I did a vlog of that, which I'll link for you if you haven't seen already. But the rest of the time we just kind of chilled at home, and it meant I could get a lot of reading done, and it was just fabulous basically. So yeah, I have quite a few books to talk to you about today. Before I do that, I'm going to talk you through my statistics. So one of the books that I read was a 2018 release, at least in this country, and the rest were backlist books. I read 8 YA, 1 thriller, 2 contemporary, 1 children's book, 2 non-fiction. So it's a big YA month for me. I think because I got a lot of stuff out from the library and I just had a bit of a, ooh, YA from the library sort of month. And then my theme for the month was books beginning with April. And I read all 5 of those, so very successful reading month for that as well. And then in terms of my star ratings, I had 2 5-star books, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 3-star books and 3 4-star books. I kind of didn't do that in order, but there we go. So it's a pretty good reading month for me, although you could maybe say mediocre at the same time, so there's a lot of 3-star reads in there, although I don't tend to split it up into halves, so I'll tell you what they are in terms of halves when I get to them later in the video. So after that massive introduction, let's jump into what I read in April. The first book that I completed in April was Things a Bright Girl Can Do, and this is by Sally Nichols, and I'd been reading this in March but just finished it as April rolled around. And this is a YA novel, and it focuses around the time when during the suffragette and the suffragist movement in Britain, and it follows 3 characters, a girl called Evelyn, and I think she's sort of around the 18 or 19 mark, and she comes from quite a well-to-do family, and she's desperate to go off to university, but her father won't let her, wants to send her brother instead, and her brother's not particularly bothered about going to university. And then we also follow a character called May, who comes again from a bit of a well-to-do family, but she just lives with her mother, and her mother is a big suffragist. Yeah, part of the big a big sort of suffragist member. I don't know, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, and so she helps her mother out with that, and she's a big part of that sort of movement. And then we also follow a girl called Nell, and she lives in the East End of London, and I loved Nell's character, just because a lot of my family come from the East End of London, and the way that her life was being described in the sort of early 1900s, I could just see my own family and the way that they lived at that particular time, and it was just really interesting from that point of view. Evelyn doesn't meet Nell and May, but Nell and May do meet, and they have a bit of a lesbian relationship as well, and it's just fabulous. It really, really is. I really enjoyed the way that it showed you what was happening in the suffragette and the suffragist movement at that particular time, and I do think it's a really important topic for teenagers to read about, and this was a really accessible way for them to read about it. I remember thinking when I put it down that it missed a few sort of tricks for me. And because it was right at the beginning of April, I can't really remember what those tricks were now. Having read so many books in April, I just remember thinking that it probably could have done with going maybe into a bit more detail about the movements and things like that. But I do think it was a really well written book. I think loads of teenagers would really enjoy it, and it would teach them an awful lot, and I gave that one 4 stars. Next up I read Lullaby, or this is called The French Nanny, I think it's been published as in the UK, and this is by Layla Zamani. This is a proof copy that I picked up in a charity shop a couple of months ago, and this was one of the books that I read for my books beginning with April sort of thing for the month, so hence this is L, obviously. this is a thriller, and it focuses around a family who at the beginning of the book are looking for a nanny to look after their 2 children because the mum wants to go back to work. She worked as a lawyer before she had her 2 children, and they sort of interview a few, I think, and then come across this woman called Louise. And when they hire her, she seems like the perfect woman for the job. She's done it before, she comes with really good references, and when she starts, she's just so good with the kids, but she also keeps house for them, like she cleans for them and she cooks dinner for them, and she sort of weaves herself into their life, and it's like they couldn't have lived their life without her, basically. But you know from the very beginning of the book, like on the opening couple of pages, Louise kills the 2 children, and then we kind of go back to when they hired her and kind of see kind of what happened when they hired her, and sort of on from there. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. It's quite short for a thriller. How many pages is it? Like 207. So I thought it was quite sinister at moments, and it had a lot of good commentary in here on like being a parent, and you know, that kind of idea of, oh well, I don't have to completely be in love with being a parent, if that makes any kind of sense. You know, wanting your own life, that sort of thing, but also trying to balance that with the fact that you're having to bring up your children. But yeah, it was also quite sinister at moments. There was this particular moment with a chicken, and a chicken they'd eaten for dinner, which I won't say any more about, but it just made me feel disgusting. And it was just a really horrible moment, but so well written as well. I really liked this, I did. I think I gave this 4 stars. Let me just have a little look in my notebook. Oh no, I didn't. I gave it 3.5 stars. Again, I'm not really sure why. I can't remember from the beginning of the month. That's really, really terrible. I'm really sorry. Maybe because, yeah, I think because not everything is explained. It's left a little bit open-ended. And while I don't like books that tie everything up in a neat bow, I think, you know, I've read some books where things are tied up a bit too neatly and it's all a bit too convenient. This for me was a little bit too open-ended, and I felt like I still had a lot of questions at the end of it. So I would recommend it as a thriller if you like that kind of book, if you like open-ended books as well. Yeah, and it was a good kind of like family thriller as well. So yeah, 3.5 stars. And next up I read The Namesake, and this is by Jhumpa Lahiri, and this was one again that I was reading in March, and it was supposed to be for my prize winner category. I had that thing for the month of March. Failed completely on that, and you guys know that already. But I was still reading this, but I finished it off in April. I was really excited to pick this up because I saw Olive from A Book Olive. She read this, I think, in February and had really good things to say about it. And I think I watched her review of it when after I put this on my TBR. I think I had anyway. So I was kind of really excited. It was the first prize winner that I picked up, the only one as it seems. This follows a a man called Gogol, and it follows his parents as they arrive in the country from, is it India or Pakistan? I think it's India. Yeah, I think it's India. They arrive in the country from so they arrive in America from India and set up a life in America, and then they have Gogol, and then a few years later his little sister, and when he's first born they had this tradition in their family where they had to write to one of the elders in the family, like in this case it was his grandmother, and ask what his name should be, but she never got the letter, or the letter from her didn't arrive back to them, so they ended up calling him Gogol as like his second name, which is not like his surname but is like a little nickname almost, and that he was named after a writer that his dad really enjoyed, I think a Russian writer, and it's about Gogol then growing up with this name and not particularly being that bothered about having this name, and he gets really embarrassed at school by it and stuff like that. And then we just see him sort of grow up and live his life, and not through to his death or anything like that, but you know, him grow up and things like that. And I thought it was alright. I enjoyed the writing. I thought the writing was really good, and I thought she had a lot of good things to say on the idea of identity and the names that we have and where we come from, and culture and family and that sort of thing. But I just wasn't that enamoured by it. Yeah, and I'm not sure if I'm going to pick up anything else by her. Maybe from the library. She's got one called The Interpreter of Maladies, which I think also won some sort of prize. This won the Pulitzer Prize. I think that won some sort of prize, or it's shortlist of something like that. But I might pick it up from the library, and I'm not particularly bothered about keeping this on my shelf. If you watched my unhaul last week, this is one that I unhauled, so I don't want to keep it on my shelf, and it's only in this video because I haven't taken the bags to the charity shop yet, so there we go. The next book that I read in April was Matilda, and this is by Roald Dahl. This was a reread for me. If you watched my April, yeah, we are talking about April, aren't we? If you watched my April TPR, I said that I had a bit of a hankering to read this after I'd watched one of my sister's videos where one of the songs from the film was in the background, and it just sort of made me all nostalgic and things. And this is just such a lovely book. It's pretty, the film is pretty close to the book, but there are some other bits and pieces in here that are different. For example, this is set in the UK, whereas the film is set in America. But it was just so lovely to read again. It's just so lovely to read about a little girl who just loves reading and going to the library, and oh, it was just amazing. So yeah, I gave this 5 stars. I still haven't watched the film yet. That's a bit of a trend with me really, but yeah, love the book. Next up from the library, I read Warcross by Marie Lu. I've never picked up anything by Marie Lu before, and I'm quite intrigued about possibly reading some of their other stuff now. I was also intrigued about reading this book because I'd heard it compared somewhat to Ready Player One by Ellis Klein, and I really, really loved that book. This is a story about a virtual reality sort of game. I can't remember the name of the game now, which is really ridiculous, and it follows a main character who is a bit of a bounty hunter in the game. So she goes and finds people that owe money and that, or have done particular bad things in the game, like that sort of thing. I'm really articulate today. They're watching the opening ceremony of this massive sort of game within a game, and she does something to get herself in the game, and then she obviously realises that she'd made a terrible mistake, but she wakes up the next morning and she's got all these missed calls on her phone, and the owner of the game wants her to basically come and work for him, and the story takes off from there. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was excellent. Not as good as Ready Player One. I think you can compare them because of the virtual reality game aspect of them, and the fact that we've got young it's from the perspective of a younger character. Like Wade is like a late teenager, I think he's like 17 or 18 in the game, and the main character in Warcross is, I think, of a similar age. So in that sort of sense they're quite similar, but then yeah, Warcross goes and does its own thing. This is the start of a series. I think it's a trilogy, and the second one is coming out at some point this year, and I'm really anticipating picking that one up. I had to take it back to the library, but I really want to pick myself up a copy of it to have on my shelf, and I really want my husband to read it as well. So if you're wondering about that one, then I would definitely recommend it, and I think, yeah, I gave that one 4 stars. Next up, again from the library, I read Rebel of the Sands, and this is by Alwyn Hamilton. This is another YA fantasy series with a desert setting, and this is the first in a trilogy, I believe, and all 3 books I think are out now, or the 3rd one's coming out soon, something like that. I really enjoyed this one. Again, I'm not really into fantasy, and if you've been watching my channel for a while you'll know that, but maybe YA fantasy is more enjoyable for me than adult fantasy, or maybe is a better starting point for me anyway. This follows a main character whose name I can't remember, one sec. So this follows a main character called Amani, And at the beginning of the book, she lives in this little town in the middle of the desert, and she's desperate to escape from this town and go and make a better life for herself. She has heard whisperings that she's been promised to her stepfather, I think, who she lives with, and she's absolutely disgusted by that, and she just wants to escape anyway. And then one day this sort of rebel comes through town, and there are loads of soldiers looking for him, and she ends up escaping with this rebel, and then finding out about the current people who are ruling the empire, let's say, and the people who kind of want to overthrow them. And it's about her escaping and her adventures in the desert, and then trying to like come together with this group of people who are trying to overthrow the people who are in charge of the empire. And I really enjoyed this. I thought it was full of adventure and action. I loved the characters, I loved the world. I thought it was really unique, and there were all of these sort of like deserty creatures, and there were these horses like that come out of the sand that you could tame, which I can't remember the name of them off the top of my head, but I think it was just really clever how it was put together. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Next up was a buddy read that I did with Kerry Ann from Woman vs Books, and we read together Eleanor and Park, and this is by Rainbow Rowell. This is the first Rainbow Rowell book that I read, and it certainly won't be the last. I really enjoyed it. This obviously follows 2 characters, Eleanor and Park, and Eleanor has just recently moved back in with her mum and her stepfather and all of her little brothers and sisters, and she's going to school again for the first time, and she gets on the bus for the first time to go back to school. And there's that sort of classic thing about, oh, you know, who you're going to sit next to on the bus, like nobody wants you next to them, like that sort of thing. And then there's this boy there called Park who begrudgingly lets her sit next to him, and it's about this relationship that blossoms between the 2 of them. Eleanor is a very unconventional character in the sense that she dresses very differently from everybody else. She thinks of herself as fat. She doesn't think she's particularly good looking. She questions her intelligence and things like that, but this relationship that forms between her and Park is just lovely. But it also deals with some quite serious topics, like we're not really told at the beginning of the book why it is that Eleanor had to leave her family home for a year. She went and slept on the sofa of some people that she knew. I can't remember who they were now, whether they were family members or friends. But later in the book you find out why she had to leave, and just a bit more about her family situations and stuff like that. And her stepfather is just an abusive menace, basically. A drunkard, he's just absolutely horrible, and she doesn't have a particularly nice home life. Her mother is scared of her stepfather, so she kind of just goes along with whatever he wants and doesn't really do anything to protect her children. And in the meantime, her children are under the influence of his nastiness, basically. So yeah, it sort of covers some really serious topics like that too. I just love the way this was written. I loved the characters in it. They were so well fleshed out, so well developed, and the relationship between Eleanor and Park, like I mentioned, was just so sweet. But also there were it didn't all go like swimmingly. Like there were, I sometimes find that in some YA contemporary books, or some contemporary books in general really, you know, you get this relationship and everything just goes so well, and they all live happily ever after, and it doesn't always work like that. So but this kind of reflected that it doesn't always work like that, and I just loved it. I really did. So this was a 5-star read for me. I'm going to have to go a little bit quicker, otherwise we're going to be here all day. Plus my mother is coming over at 1 o'clock, and it's currently 25 to, so I have 25 minutes to make sure I film this video, basically. Next up I read Isla and the Happily Ever After. This is by Stephanie Perkins. This is the 3rd book in the Anna and the French Kiss series, and this follows characters that we've briefly met in the original book in the series, Anna and the French Kiss. And so it follows Isla and her relationship with this guy called Josh. There we go. I know it began with J. I quite like this one. There was some nice moments where we kind of went to Barcelona and they were in Paris again. I just like that whole kind of different country sort of travel aspect to it. There were some moments in here where things didn't always go well for them, which I appreciated. But yeah, not my favourite in the series. I think my favourite in the series is still Anna and the French Kiss, maybe just for nostalgic reasons, but I don't know. What did I give this? 3.5 stars. Next up from the library I read Tiny Pretty Things, and this is by... Sorry about that, I just had like something fall from the top shelf and yeah, that was really... Okay, anyway, moving on. So yeah, next up I read Tiny Pretty Things, and this is by Sonia Charapotra and Donielle Clayton, and this is another YA contemporary book following a ballet school and some girls in this who goes to this ballet school in New York. I quite like this one. I've got the other one on order from the library because it's a duology, and I just was totally enamoured by just the cruel things that go on at this ballet school and the way the girls treat each other and the really quite nasty competition between them. And it was just really interesting reading about that. And I think one of the authors, I think it might be Sonia Charapotra, she was a teacher at a ballet school, so she has obviously got sort of insight into what sort of things go on and things like that. I mean, obviously this is a bit more dramatised than I think would be normal, but it was just really interesting reading about that kind of world. I've never had a ballet lesson, and I've never actually been to see ballet. The closest thing I've seen is it what was that film with Natalie Portman? Was it Black Swan or something like that? That's like the only ballet thing I've seen, but I'm quite intrigued by the world. And this was, yeah, really quite intriguing from that sort of point of view. And I was intrigued enough to continue. Like I said, I've ordered the second book from the library and just waiting for it to come in. And I gave this one 3.5 stars. Next book I read was Rabbit Proof Fence, and this is by Doris Pilkington. And I didn't realise at the time that this is a non-fiction memoir, because I had it sort of in my fiction section and not in my non-fiction section. But I'd had this on my shelf for a while because this was a GCSE text a few years ago, and to be honest I can't really see why it was a GCSE text. There's not a really, for me it's not really literary enough. There's not enough to kind of get your teeth into, as it were. But this follows some girls who were born into Aborigine settlements in Western Australia, and they had Aborigine mothers and white fathers, and there was this particular law at the time which meant that the powers that be, the government, were sort of scooping up Aborigines who had white fathers and sending them off to school and taking them away from their parents and things like that. And that's what happened to these three little girls, and it's about the fact that they escape and make their way back to where they originally lived. And they basically walked from sort of just above Fremantle, which is near to Perth sort of city centre, all the way down to the Jopra Valley or something like that. I can't remember. I'll put the name up on the screen here. But it's quite a while. There's a map like in the front of the book, and it's they walked for like 2 or 3 months or something like that. It was quite a journey to make their way back, and it was just about sort of the journey and what they had to endure and things like that. I found it quite interesting. It was not a particularly long book. I think it was something like 150 pages, which again quite surprised me. But yeah, I found it quite interesting, just learning a bit more about Australian history and Aborigine culture and stuff like that, and this journey that these girls had to make. And yeah, I would be quite interested in seeing the film as well. Just I think from a point of view of how they're going to make that into a full-length feature, just from that point of view I think it's interesting. But I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Next up I read A Man Called Eva, and this is by Fredrik Backman. I was really interested in picking this one up because a lot of people have recommended Fredrik Backman's writing, and a colleague at work really likes him as well. And this was one of those instances where I just don't have the same opinion as everybody else. I quite liked it. This basically tells the story of this old man called Eva, and at the beginning of the book his wife has just died, and he lives in this little neighbourhood where he's a bit of a busybody. He goes out every morning to check that all of these little rules are being followed to do with, you know, what they've put in place, like you can't park in a certain area, or you can't do this, or you can't do that. And he goes out and he checks, and he's this really sort of grumpy old man. And then some new neighbours move in across the road and sort of disrupt his life and the way that he wants to do things and the choices that he wants to make, and the story sort of goes on from there. And I did ultimately enjoy this. I did really appreciate Eva's story, and it dived into how he met his wife and how he grew up and his life with his wife and how his wife died and things like that. And I thought it was really sweet, and I did grow to like Eva's character, but I just wasn't that engaged in the story all the way through. I think I picked it up towards the beginning of the month and I didn't finish it until towards the end. It took me quite a while to kind of get the motivation up to pick it up again. So again, this is another one where I'm going to unhaul this, and I'll probably pick the other ones that he's written up from the library, and maybe not like, I'm not that enamoured to pick them up like right now basically. And I gave this one 3.5 stars. Next up I read Paper Towns, and this is by John Green. This is my second John Green book. And this follows two characters who are Quentin and Margot. And at the beginning of the book, Margot is this sort of really popular girl in school, and Quentin really looks up to her. And he basically has this massive crush on her. And they've been neighbours for many, many years and friends, but not really friends in school. And one day she knocks on his window and asks him to sort of sneak out, and they go and complete this list where she wants to get back at her ex-boyfriend and stuff like that, and then they go and sneak into SeaWorld and things like that. And then the next morning she disappears, and Quentin is trying to look for her basically. Again, I quite enjoyed the reading experience. It was really, yeah, quick to get through. I read it quite quickly in like a week or something like that when I was back at work. And there are a few quotes that I liked in this. There was one about like paper, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but I just think there were some quite good metaphors in here and quite good commentary in it. But I read the last few pages of it and I was like, oh, that's kind of it. I don't really see the point of it, to be honest. So yeah, I wasn't that enamoured by it, and I won't be keeping it, and I gave this one 3 stars. Another one that I read from the library was Burn for Burn, and this is by Jenny Han and Siobhan Vivian, and I was inspired to pick this up by Karen from Ratherby Reading. She read this trilogy last month, I think, or the month before, and really enjoyed it. This is basically like a revenge story, so it follows these 3 girls' perspectives, and they all want to get revenge on different people in their lives, so they get together and they plot out what they're going to do to these people. It sounds, I've said this before, it sounds really quite bitchy, but it's not as bitchy and ridiculous as you might think. I quite enjoyed it, to be honest. I am going to be continuing on in the series. I've ordered the second book from the library, and yeah, because I think this is a trilogy. Yeah, it's a trilogy, so I'm really sort of intrigued to carry on, and this one I gave 3.75 stars. And the last book that I read in April was one that I had been listening to on audio, and that was Down the Rabbit Hole, Curious Adventures and Cautionary Tales of a Former Playboy Bunny by Holly Madison. And I put this on my Audible wish list quite a while ago now, from the recommendation from Acacia over at Acacia Ives. She, I think, read this rather than listen to it on audio, but I can't be sure of that. But I sort of added it to my audio list, and I listened to it, and it's narrated by Holly Madison, who wrote the book, and it's just about her experience of being a Playboy bunny and living in the Playboy mansion, and eventually getting out of the Playboy mansion and sort of her life afterwards. And I quite enjoyed it. I thought there were It's weird, isn't it? There were lots of moments where I was sort of shouting at my car stereo, because I listened to audiobooks in the car on the way to work and things, and I was sort of shouting at my car stereo things along the lines of, well, obviously, or why did you think that was acceptable? But then again, you have to kind of bear in mind that Holly was quite young, I suppose, and quite naive when she first entered the Playboy mansion, and I suppose I'm looking at it from, you know, I'm in my 30s, and so the kind of idea of making those decisions I just don't get. But then that's because I have the benefit of experience, I suppose. But it was really interesting learning about what went on in the Playboy mansion and the sort of rules that they had to follow. And it mentioned people like Kendra Wilkinson, and she was on I'm a Celebrity a few years ago. It was just interesting getting another person's perspective on Kendra Wilkinson, because obviously she portrayed herself in a particular way when she was in the jungle, and that's not always true. I mean, I know that anyway, I'm not that naive, but yeah, it was just interesting getting that different perspective and kind of, and then how Holly got on with her life after the mansion and things. It was quite an interesting listen. I didn't like her voice all the way through the audiobook. I think she could get a little bit whiny at times, yeah, there were moments when I was just sort of cringing, but I quite enjoyed the listen, sorry, and I ended up giving that one 3 stars. So there we go, that was quite a long video. I'm not sure how long, but I'm on my 3rd lot of 20 minutes, so that's like, what's that, like 33 minutes of footage so far. So yeah, hoping that's going to be slightly shorter than that when I edit it. But there we go. I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments below. Have you read any of these, and what did you think of them? What sort of books did you read in April that you really enjoyed? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.